Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Geer, here with you as well. And Doug, what do we want to title this show today?
We're going to title this The Miracle of the Atlas, because this is something that we just experienced out in New York. We were able to take my sister, Rich's wife, out to see a chiropractor in Rock Hill, New York, who specializes in the adjustment of the top vertebrae of the spine, which is the atlas.
Which is called the atlas, correct? Yes, and it was very interesting because we've talked about some things over the course of doing some shows, but we originally went out to interview the inventor of the MRI down in Melville, New York, and did some specialty brain scans. He works with Dr. Rosa in Rock Hill, New York, who is a chiropractor. Dr. Damadian and Dr. Dr. Rosa is a chiropractor, and they're finding things out very, very powerful, dealing with adjustment of the very top vertebrae, as Doug said, that when it gets twisted wrong, it prevents the CSF from flowing. That's cerebral spinal fluid. They're finding out the cerebral spinal fluid is more than just a cushion for the brain. It actually seems to be it washes toxins. There's almost a washing, like the way you described it, Doug, it was like a washing machine almost. Sounded like it was going back and forth. It would scrub your brain of toxins and flush them out. And a lot of cool things happened. We were out there 10 days. Doug drove out, and I flew the aide and Carol out. And a lot of neat things happening. But we weren't really sure exactly what to happen. We were kind of hoping for huge things. You read things in the Bible, Doug. Jesus touches a guy and they're walking. Where this is not going to be quite like that unless something happens cumulatively, and who knows.
Let's back up and actually explain
a little bit
what happened to Carol. Go back in the history and
fair enough.
With people what really her condition was and why we actually ended up here.
Right. So 12 years ago, Doug was involved. Carol was going in for, I would say, a fairly routine surgery. It was called a bowel resection. She had some diverticulosis. She had researched it several times, talked to several people who said it was the best thing they ever did. She went in and under anesthesia and never came out normal. She for 12 years, she's been fed through a feeding tube. She can't walk, she can't talk. Very spastic, like her body was like this. We've been working with her 12 years range of motion, but even so, she's a lot of, it's not rigor mortis, but it feels like her body's really tense. When we went to Dr. Damadian for another purpose to interview him for our show here, he's talking about some of the brain things they're discovering with the cerebral spinal fluid and the vertebrae. He's worked with Dr. Rosa, and he said, "I think we can help Carol."
And that was kind of amazing to us because,
I said, well, part of it is just he was explaining, and you can see this on YouTube. A friend that works and looked this up about Jim McMahon, the quarterback of the Chicago Bears, who had very, very bad symptoms of dementia, and headaches, and fainting spells, just bad. He was feeling actually suicidal.
He got dumped on his head in the football game.
Football games, yeah. Well, he's a quarterback.
Was really injured pretty badly, and
so he was referred to Dr. Damadian. They saw the scan. Dr. Rosa did an adjustment. He said it felt like a toilet flushing, and he got pretty good until he banged his head about 10 months later. Then he had to get it refixed. He banged his head going into a plane or something. But the long and short of it is, I said that Doug and I were thinking, at least I know I was. I'm assuming you, Doug, felt the same way. But we were thinking, well, Carol was never on a football field. She never had any injuries like that. It turns out, Dr. Rosa confirmed, my son-in-law said, when they intubate you for anesthesia, they're not always the most careful when they actually hyperextend your neck. Mm-hmm. Dr. Rosa said they actually sometimes twist your neck to get the tube down there. It's called intubation down there. Anybody's had general anesthesia, something like that. And we don't know that is what caused it, but it seems likely that may be the culprit. Long and short of it is, the MRI showed that the atlas bone was actually off. What was it, 18 degrees, I think is what he said?
18 degrees off.
18 degrees off. None of the cerebral spinal fluid was flowing in either direction. In fact, the atlas was off, causing the second vertebrae to be off, and the second set of four were actually bent and were in an opposite direction. There was nothing happening. And significantly, Doug, because I asked him this question, you were there when I asked him, I said, well, you only adjusted the top, but what about the second, well, the next five debris? He says, they're going to go right into place when the first one goes into place.
Apparently that top one is a key because the rest of them go click, 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 go all the way down.
And it seems that that's what's happened, yeah.
And so this is, we did the adjustment on the 23rd of July.
Yes.
And, I think we also, at that point in time, she was fussy when she went into that. And when
very fussy.
And when we did the adjustment, he said he used this Atlas orthogonal percussion instrument on her.
Right.
And it only took about click, 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 click. And
about 3 seconds,
And
Count of three.
the thing of it is, they spent quite a bit of time studying the MRI scans. Dr. Damadian actually came up with, to supervise the adjustment. And so they were actually calculating precisely how much the pressure to put on it. And so it was over before we really realized it.
Yeah, he goes, Carol, we laid her on we got to pick her up, put her on the table, laid her kind of on her left side, and went behind, and he goes, Carol, just count to five, it'll be done. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because it was done on 3, really. And it went boom, and Carol settled right down.
Well, I saw her look up at me, and she said, as if to say, well, this is different. And so it was, and really we noticed immediately that there was a incredible calming, as if there was now some peace going on here with her. And so we had her checked the next day, and the adjustment was still holding.
Yep.
But we took her back on Wednesday, and she was
really fussy again. Yep.
And she was out, and so he had to.
And the same thing happened.
Yeah.
Once he did the doom, she settled right down.
And he said that the first 72 hours is critical. That if it stays in for 72 hours, it's likely to continue to be in place. It's because then the muscles, I guess, you get used to it.
And that was a neat thing, because Dr. Rosa, they were planning to be off. We were not planning to go in until the following Monday.
Right.
Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday would be just free days, or basically trying to keep Carol comfortable, maybe do a little traveling around. We're in the Catskills area, pretty scenic and beautiful area.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, he came in on Friday to see Carol, and so from Wednesday to Friday it had held. He said, that's very good. And then he came in on Saturday again and saw her.
Yeah, he had a special trip to make sure that it was in place. And we were grateful for the way that he treated us and did a lot of good things. This isn't our normal show on creation.
No, this is not our normal show. But what was interesting, I will say this though, that first night, or first day when we went in there, he was expecting to do battle with this vertebrae.
Right.
And he kept saying God showed up, because it went boom so fast and stayed in. He says God showed up. I thought we were at the battle. Imagine this. It's been out for 12 years, or ever since they. And the way he was explaining the way the fluid pumps in, it's from the ventricle of the brain, and there was no place for it to go. He said you could see the fluid covering her brain, and the ventricles were swollen up 4 times bigger than normal, and then the fluid is on top of that, likening it really. And every time a heartbeat goes, it's pumping fluid in. I'm thinking, this is a 12-year migraine, Doug.
I know, yeah.
And I can't even imagine it. And so when this happened, and she seemed to be relaxed, and she's been very, very relaxed. We actually took her back down to Dr. Damadian's on Tuesday, and I would say maybe at first glimpse it kind of was a mistake. It was a 3-hour trip down there. She got into the
driving
MRI,
across New York City.
Yeah, it was bad, and she was uncomfortable. She was probably wet, you know, I mean, probably she was, you know, not, she needed to be changed and fixed, you know, and she was not happy. And then you're in this upright thing where you got to kind of put you in, and you got this big helmet. Anyway, it turned out though, Doug, we got 2 or 3 good images despite that fact. I thought Dr. Rosa, because we came back then, and that night we drove back up, all on the same day. And Dr. Rosa said we did get 3 or 4 good images. One thing we saw was the brainstem was kind of crooked, or out of not looking right.
In the first MRI.
Yeah, in the other MRIs, and now it's straight. Right. And then the second set, and then the ventricles, although subtle, you could see some shrinkage in it. You could see some; it was coming down. That is huge. That is really huge. So during the week, Amy, the aide who comes in, I'm going to do a little name drop here. She was a jewel, and she was really good. She saw some things that was amazing. Carol's range of motion seemed to be easier. One thing that happened, Doug, that it was amazing. She was able to sleep laying almost flat.
Yeah.
Haven't done that in 12 years. Okay? And peaceful for the rest of the week. She was totally peaceful, Doug. She pretty much slept except what she needed to do.
Instead of her head crooked, it was straight up and down.
Yep. And then she said, she told me, I swear Carol was trying to get up, and this was last week, but I never saw it. Okay, and so there were several things going on even last week. When I got home, Doug, though, we and I tell you what, it was a rough trip, man. I decided not to fly out of Lansing, Doug, because I wanted to avoid a connector flight, but I also wanted to avoid puddle jumpers. But flying into Newburgh, unbeknownst to me, the only planes that go into Newburgh are puddle jumpers. That was hard getting Carol on because she's still very, very stiff. But she began to relax a little bit. On the flight back was a little bit easier, but her foot got a little bit banged up. I got her home, and she was fussy for 3 days in a row, Doug. 3 straight days. I think I got less than 3 hours sleep. Well, maybe I got 3 hours if I was lucky because I was so exhausted. And I had to get up and go into work the next day and the next day. And but then Friday night, early Saturday morning, about 4, maybe 4:30, 5:30, something like that, suddenly all the crying stopped. And I kind of got up to see, is she okay? And she was okay. She was just sleeping very peacefully, just very relaxed. The next morning, Doug, and this was amazing because I saw her, she was in the bed, she was looking up at me, and then she turned like her left side, and she's like she was trying to move herself. Her arm was moving like this. It's like she was trying to sit up in bed. Now, part of it might have been like spastic releasing, it might have been involuntary, but it looked almost voluntary. It really doesn't matter. It's the fact that there's movement in her body I hadn't seen in 12 years, Doug. If I'd stretch her arm out like this, her arm maybe would go back up in the spasm like this.
Right.
And this last week, her arm has been relaxed like this.
Right, yeah.
So then, this one, she's going like this, trying to do it, but it would go back and forth. It wasn't just going like this. It was not the same at all. So I was beginning to believe, or I was thinking, I'm not a doctor, I'm not pretending to diagnose it, Doug, but we talked about this earlier. I think she was trying to get rid of some of those toxins. The first night, I didn't tell you this, her shirt was soaked with sweat. Soaked. And I thought, oh my gosh, is she catching a cold? Is she getting sick? That's not it at all.
What that's indicating is that there's some healing going on.
That's what I believe.
And if you have something that's, you've had that build up with the inflammatory stuff going on for all that time. This is a sign that there is healing taking place. And, one of the things, I learned this from Dr. Jean-Guy Daillon, the guy who I'm going for my chiropractic. He says that our health is something that we have to actually visualize in ourselves. And one of the things I want to tell Carol is that since we've corrected the issue that's causing this, now it's up to her to actually claim this for herself and to try to do something new every day that you didn't do before.
Yeah, one more thing. Last week when we were out in Big Rock, or Rock Hill, I keep saying, I know there's a rock in the title, but it's, it was very cool. I was doing a little love talk to Carol. I was just telling her, honey, I love you. We're trying to get you all straightened out. And I was kind of had my hand cradled in the back of her head, just kind of talking and whispering to her and telling her how much I cared for her, and we want to see you get back and healthy, and we're gonna work this out. And she looked at me, big smile on her face, Doug. Big smile, and then tears started coming out of her eyes. And I had not seen that ever.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like she believed what I was saying. There was almost a volition. People ask me all the time, does she understand you? I said, it's been hard to know because she can't verbalize.
Right. Yeah.
But she does do certain things, and now she's doing more things, Doug. Before, she would cry mainly when she was wet, or maybe when she was hungry. There was nothing else really that was registering. Now she's registering things where she wants to, when people are in the room and when they leave. Like when we were talking the other day, again in Rock Hill, you were on one side, Amy was sitting over here, and I'm sitting next to her. And was Carol, what was she doing, Doug?
Oh, she would, if I talked to her, she'd turn to me and look.
Which is a direction she never did before.
Right, yeah.
Yep. And then she'd turn, Amy would say something, she looked at her, and then she'd look her eyes back like this to me, and Doug would say something, and she'd look back to him. It was amazing. It was really amazing. So it almost sounds like magic, but realize there's 30 years of research that Dr. Rosa has in this.
Right.
And combined with the MRI breakthroughs that Dr. Damadian brought in, this does something it's revolutionary, Doug. And I think of the scripture, Doug, when it talks about the glory of God. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to ferret it out.
Exactly, yeah.
And I really believe that God takes great joy in His creation, figuring out something that maybe seems so basic, but so life-changing in His creation. Broken as this world is, Doug, the vestiges, and more than vestiges, of God's goodness are still manifest in things like this.
Well, I take a look at all the different series of miracles that brought this about.
I know. Go through it.
The first thing was that my publisher came to me because Dr. Damadian's story is in my book, Persuaded by the Evidence,
yeah.
but it was Jerry Bergman, my co-editor, who actually obtained the story from Dr. Damadian, and so that was one thing, is that Dr. Bergman was able to get that story from Dr. Damadian.
Yeah.
And so then it went in the book, Persuaded by the Evidence, and then we had Dr. Damadian had a book published about his invention of the MRI in the book Gifted Mind.
Gifted Minds, right? Yeah.
And so my publisher calls me and he says, would you like the opportunity to go out and to interview Dr. Damadian? And I said, well, maybe the way that I could do that would be just to give them a phone call, do a phone interview, have them take a video on their end, we do a video on their end, on our end, and we sort of combine the two together. And then I got to thinking about that, and really New York is not that far to drive. And so it would probably be worth our while to actually go visit him and do that interview. Well, I talked to Rich about it, and he at first was so swamped at work that it was not really possible to do it on the date that Dr. Damadian was available, but you managed to swing it.
I basically, something inside of me said, and I think it's a spirit, but I said, I need to go and do this. And there was no connection with Carol whatsoever at this point, zero. I just said, no, I felt compelled to go. I said, so we went out there, and that's the cool thing, Doug. We were out there, and did the interview. Dr. Damadian, what an amazing, his name of his original machine is called the Indomitable. I call him the Indomitable guy. He is amazing. He's a force of nature, a beautiful person, just a great, great man in so many respects. But we're talking, he starts sharing things, and he's come up with a new MRI The MRIs you see around, he had all the patents for all those things, but it's recumbent. You lay down. He's come up with what's called an upright MRI. They're able to see more things, put you in positions that normally where they could, if there's a stress or a pain or something, they can see it better.
Right.
And they can actually tilt you a little bit this one way to the side, but they take the same slices, front, back, top to bottom, side to side. But he started talking about a lot of brain injuries.
Right, yeah.
That this has been able to diagnose, been able to see things.
Yeah, he had in his office a model of the spine, and
Right.
and just like the chiropractor, and you know, I recognized that, but it didn't connect to me that you know, they were actually doing MRIs for chiropractors, and he started telling his stories about
It was after the interview was over, and we'd already stopped. We'd take the cameras down. We started talking. He started telling us. First telling us about the cancer things they can kind of look at. And they can tell if medicine is really going to be effective. They can take the initial scan, and they start giving you the medication. They can take a scan like what, a 5 minute, 8 minute, or something like that, and boom, they showed us the tumor was shrinking. But then the big thing was we were finding some things out with the atlas vertebrae. I don't even know if he used the term atlas at the time. He probably did, but and he said we're finding implications for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, dementia, cerebral palsy, ALS, right, and
autism.
Autism, and all these things seem to have tie-ins to this atlas vertebrae being out of whack, and so. And I go, wow, yeah. And then we started talking. I don't know how we got into Carol. I said, yeah, Carol got messed up in a hospital thing about 12 years ago, and she hasn't really walked or talked. She said she's really not able to do it. And he looks right at me and he goes, I think we can help Carol.
Yeah.
And I go, what? That's another part of the circumstance.
Right, yeah.
And then I go, well, she was never on a football field. He told us about Jim McMahon, you know.
Right, yeah.
And I said, but she never had any traumatic things as far as I knew, nothing. Obviously, Carol's not a football player. But he turned again a second time and said, no, I think we can help her.
And what it tells me is that you know, he has confidence that a lot of these different brain injury diseases are all tied to this particular one thing. I think he's right about that. And Dr. Rosa was talking about how this manifests itself in different ways depending upon how screwed up it is. You know?
Yeah, I know.
And so it's a really amazing thing. That atlas is sitting right on the place where the skull meets the
It's the top vertebrae, the base of the skull into the spinal cord.
And I also learned that you know, they're finding out that adjusting the atlas helps with blood pressure.
Oh, that's the other thing I didn't mention. I did not mention that. Carol's blood pressure, she's had to take blood pressure medicine, and it's been, sometimes it gets normal, but then
it's 160.
It's been 160 over 120 or 110, and that all week it was like 110 over 68, 117 over 70. It was just nothing really.
Yeah, it went to normal.
It went to normal.
And that's because, and I learned actually at the chiropractor I go to that they were running a video there that talked about it, where the atlas was actually involved in that. The blood vessel that goes up into the brain goes through that same area, and so another consequence of the atlas being out of kilter is that it restricts the blood going through that. And because of the blood pressure stuff.
I didn't know you knew that, but I didn't know that either. I didn't know that until you just said that, but it does not surprise me. I remember, of course, I told Dr. Rosa this. I said, you know, I think the best thing that ever happened to the medical profession was when the Chiropractic Association won a lawsuit back in the early 80s. Now doctors and chiropractors work together quite regularly. It's not uncommon at all now. It's interesting because what you're finding is each one is complementing each other. Dr. Damadian he said, you know, I'm an MD, and we learned about the spinal column, but it was just a stack of blocks. That's about all. We did not understand. And I mean, we kind of knew it a little bit, but it's the idea that all the neurological, all the spinal cord goes through out into your body, and I mean, I grew up, I told Dr. Dr. Rosa, I said, yeah, I grew up calling it chiropractics. The first I ever heard of it was Doug's family. And I go, you go to a chiropractor? I thought a little bit strange. This is back you're talking about in the 60s and 70s, and I never heard of it. I didn't think anybody ever. And I tell you what, I remember the first time I got sold on it a little bit was when I went into there and they did an x-ray, and I said, okay. And this one, and I had horse throats for years. And I did not tell them about that because I didn't think about it. The vertebrae that affects some of that was off. And I'm not, and ever since they did that, I haven't really had, I do go to the chiropractor from time to time, but not very often. And I haven't had horse throat since then, Doug. Things like that almost seem like miraculous stuff. But Dr. Damadian, what I like is this thing, he said, well, I was asked after the invention of the MRI, I'm not sure what the time frame between his invention and publications and stuff, that he was asked to address a conference. And there were like 4,000 chiropractors, and he goes, that was my wake-up call. It's like, these guys must be doing something right. How could these guys be making a living,
right,
if they were doing nothing right? Anyway, long and short of it, there's about 30 years of research, and along with that, Dr. Damadian has come up, they had a program, how they can document the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid now. And that's that's the one thing we haven't gotten yet, so.
Yeah, they put a little thing on your finger to get the heartbeat, and that synchronizes it with the cerebral spinal fluid flow, because and then they can measure it as they have it actually do MRI movies as it's going on. So that's how this is what we want to do when we bring Carol out again.
Yeah, we made the mistake of traveling her. She was very, very agitated after a 3-hour trip down to New York. But we still got some good images, but we did not get the movies we want to get there. I think it was fascinating, the story that he talked about how Dr. Rosa talked with Dr. Damadian's son. Javin, is that his name? Anyway, and it was a program that had been sitting on the shelf for quite a few years. And somebody had talked about doing it, and then the doctor lost interest or didn't want to use it, and just sat there. And Dr. Rosa goes, "No, I could use that," and got it going.
That's how he got it going. And so it's Dr. Rosa told us 4 to 8 weeks. We'll probably
6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks. We'll tell how much of the healing will take place and how much we'll be able to see Carol recover from this, and we are very hopeful to see her actually start doing some things that she hasn't been.
It's the first real hope I've had in 12 years,
right.
And I'm actually seeing things. But he told me, he says, it's going to be cumulative, and we don't know how far it's going to go. But he says, you cut your finger, it takes a week to heal. This is 12 years of really trauma. And so we'll see what's going on. Even he was very encouraged about what we had seen and what he had seen in the few days we had been out there. So we'll see what happens in 6 to 8 weeks when we go back out, Doug. I think it's pretty exciting.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our revelation of what happened with our sister, my sister, your
My wife, yep.
And we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.
I know.